Hello everybody, we're inside today, which is not really something I was foreseeing. The problem is that Tokyo has been an utter pile of grey, cloudy, rainy sludge for about the last 2 weeks. So we're here, we're inside. I want to talk about book sequels. Now there's a reason for this, which is that this week I finally got around to reading. Oh, I wish I was more clever and had something to elevate this so I looked like I was prepared. Hang on. Let's use these expensive Malazan books. So, this week I started reading Streets of Laredo by Larry McMurtry, which is the sequel to Lonesome Dove. There's actually 4 books in the Lonesome Dove series. There's 2 prequels to Lonesome Dove also, but we don't really talk about them very much. Everyone talks about Lonesome Dove. It feels like everyone has read or tried Lonesome Dove. No one talks about Streets of Laredo. So there's often a conversation around book ones of series, but usually the conversation is flipped the other way. Book 1, people will often say, is not as good as the books that follow. You've got to get through book 1 to get to books 2 and thereafter. The Dark Tower might be an example of this. Howling Dark versus Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio. I've heard many people talk about how much better Howling Dark is. Malazan is an example of people saying get through book 1 because book 2 will blow your socks off. Whether or not that's true, that is kind of the line people use when talking about book 1s of series. Often we say book 1 is weak, soldier on my friend. But what do we do when book 1 is a magnum opus and we're thinking about the sequels? And that's what I want to talk about today. And so I sat down this morning.
Hello, this is David from the future. Listen, I was just editing the video and I realised my microphone is more than a little bit busted. What I tried to say in that clip was that I want to talk about the 5 reasons why you might or might not want to pick up a sequel to a book. So there you go. Absolutely miserable day today, but what are you going to do?
And while I'm discussing these 5 reasons that might indicate for you whether or not you want to continue a book, I'm going to talk about my experience with various series that I've read. Now, I am not going to spoil any of these. They're going to be very broad strokes. This video should be entirely spoiler-free. And let's do reason number 1 that you might or might not want to continue on with a particular book series, and that is sullying, I guess. Do you think that by reading books 2+, that is going to retroactively spoil your experience with book 1? So one very famous example of this is the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy by Cixin Liu. So Liu famously has written The Three-Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and Death's End, and those make up that trilogy. But there's a 4th book. This 4th book is called Redemption of Time. It's by an author called Bao Shu, and it was not originally supposed to be set in the Three-Body Problem universe, the canonical Three-Body Problem universe. It was supposed to be fanfiction, but the publishers liked it, the publishers published it, and Cixin Liu, I understand, was forced to give his blessing, saying it was canon. Now listen, I loved Remembrance of Earth's Past. I adored this series, and I did look at this 4th book, Redemption of Time, going, shall I read it? And I decided not to, because from a quick Wikipedia skim, it seems like it really goes off the rails and explains some things that Cixin Liu wanted to be left open. The physical characteristics of certain characters, if I can put it that way. What happens to certain characters who we leave behind in the original trilogy? Bao Shu basically fills in all those gaps, and from my understanding of what I've read, they're not very satisfactorily filled in. So I know if I read this book, it will retroactively hinder what a great time I had with Remembrance of Earth's Past. Will I ever reread Remembrance of Earth's Past? I don't know. But if I do, I don't want my brain to go, oh, and then that's what happens to that character afterwards. I think that would be the wrong move for me. Another one to talk about is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, those 5 books. Now, this is a strange one, because I really love the sequels. I just hit my arm off this chair, man alive. I really love the sequels to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Restaurant at the End of the Universe, So Long Thanks for All the Fish, whatever book 3 is called. And I even do enjoy Mostly Harmless, the 5th book in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy. The problem is, I really take issue with the place where Douglas Adams leaves his characters in this 5th book. And when I go back to book 1, knowing where the characters end up in book 5, it does take away from some of the joy of the experience for me, unfortunately. I know Douglas Adams has said something very similar in interviews, that maybe he wished he wrote a 6th book, but he didn't. Unfortunately, he passed away quite suddenly from a heart attack. So book 5 is where these characters end. And that's that. And that does somewhat disappoint me. And it does, again, hinder my enjoyment of going back to that series. If someone asked me, would you recommend continuing with Hitchhiker's Guide? I still think I'd say yes, though. And I'm not sure if I can fully come to terms with that. So another video. Another thing you might want to think about when considering picking up a sequel to a magnum opus is diminishing returns. Is book 2 as good as book 1? If not, how much worse is it? Is book 3 as good as book 2? Are you going down a trajectory where you're going to have less and less enjoyment with the series as you continue? Because if that's the case, maybe it is better just sticking with book 1 and landing there. That being said, Hyperion Cantos, I often tell people that with the 4 books in the Hyperion Cantos, each sequel is about 75% as good as the one that came before, which means book 4 in the Hyperion Cantos, The Rise of Endymion, is about 44% as good as Hyperion. And let me tell you, if a book is 44% as good as Hyperion, I still think you should read that book. But this is an ongoing issue. Another book series I've heard does this is the Dune books. Now, I've only read book 1 of Dune for this reason, because I've heard Dune Messiah is pretty good. I've heard Dune book 3 is quite good, book 4 a little good, and by the time you get to the really latter sequels, we're talking kind of a fraction of a percentile of the quality that Dune has. So as much as you love a series, as much as you love a world, there is that question as to, is it worth just leaving things as they are now to have that tippy-top enjoyment? Or do you love the series enough that you're willing to be scraping the bottom of the ice cream to try and get those last kind of remnants of joy that you experienced with book 1? Is that a good analogy? Another thing you might want to think about when considering picking up the sequel to a book is the idea, unfortunately, of something feeling tacked on or for profit. Something that doesn't feel very organic, but feels like someone from up above has said, I want you to write a sequel to this because people liked book 1. Money, please. There are some book examples to this. I think a really famous one are the Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn novels. You have Tom Sawyer, you have Huckleberry Finn. Mark Twain wrote 2 sequels after Huckleberry Finn, and they're both rubbish and weird. So book 4 of the Huckleberry Finn Tom Sawyer books, the boys get into a hot air balloon and just travel around the world. It's ridiculous. I mean, not jumping the shark, literally jumping continents in this case. And it's foul. It's rubbish. And the reason it's rubbish is because Mark Twain needed money. Another example of this, it comes from the death game subgenre, right? Alice in Borderland, Squid Game if we're talking about TV, Battle Royale. I would probably put the Hunger Games here too. When your subgenre is all about taking a bunch of characters and killing them all off, it's very difficult to organically make a sequel. And I feel like often when there is a sequel to a death game type scenario, you either have to just repeat the same elements over and over, or you have to bring in a whole new cast of characters, or you have to go the prequel route so you can resurrect your characters for your book. And the result is that these stories feel very much supplementary. They feel like they're being created because the audience wants it, and not because there's necessarily any need for a continuation of that story. Another thing to consider, this chair can go quite far back, huh? Oh, nice, this was a good investment. Another thing to consider when you're thinking about whether to pick up the sequel is your satiation with book 1. I would have no problem if anyone said to me, and in fact people have said this to me, I loved Lonesome Dove, it was a top read of that year, but I have no desire to continue into book 2 because book 1 felt very discreet. It felt very standalone. I feel like I got what I needed from Lonesome Dove and I don't need to continue with Streets of Laredo. I think that is totally fair and I would respect that opinion utterly. And you know, I haven't read it, so I don't know, but I wonder about Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer in this regard, because I have authority. Sitting here, look at that, look, thumbnail. And I don't know, book 1 was great. Book 1, I've articulated it, I'm sure I'm not the first one to say this, feels like a bad dream. It's the best book that feels like a bad dream. The only competitor to that title is Ice by Anna Kavan. And maybe this also goes back to book 2 sullying book 1. I'm worried if I continue, will that joyful mystery of book 1, will that be taken away? Do I want to leave book 1 as this wonderful standalone, weird slipstream book and keep that there? Is this just a regurgitation of my first point? Let me know. It's different. I'm going to say it's different. And I'm going to talk about one more. My daughter's crying. 2 seconds. Okay, I'm back, and I have a Charizard. Right, let's just... there we go. Okay, still look at me though. My narcissism requires it. So the last one I want to talk about is the author change-up, when a sequel series or a sequel book has a different writer. This applies to a lot of the books I've already talked about, right? So for example, Dune, the author passed away at the end of book 6, and his son took up the reins. My understanding is the popular impression here is that he didn't quite live up to his father's legacy. We already spoke about Bao Shu continuing Remembrance of Earth's Past and having that spin-off novel. And another one I'd bring up here maybe is someone like Brandon Sanderson. And this one is a little bit more tricky because I actually really admire what Brandon Sanderson is doing here. For a lot of Brandon Sanderson's work, he invites other authors to come and kind of write in that world. So for example, I know his Skyward series, he's invited Janci Patterson to do some tie-in novels and short stories. I know that for his Reckoner series, he has a spin-off novel that was co-written by him and another author. My understanding, and this could be utter gossip, so you might want to disregard it, is that the other author is doing most of the heavy lifting there. My understanding is that maybe Brandon Sanderson contributes some of the ideas, and then the other author runs away with it. And you know what? When I'm here for a series, I'm usually not just there for the story and the character and the ideas. Often I'm there because I really gel with that writer's voice, and I enjoy reading about that world in the style, in the writing style that that author creates. And if it's someone else's writing style, it does make me wonder if that's something I want to do. Now, there are exceptions. Another example here might be Malazan, right? We have two authors. A lot of people don't tend to pick up Ian C. Esselmont's Malazan books because they're written in a different style by a different man. Most people seem to come to Malazan through Malazan Book of the Fallen, written by Stephen Erickson, but there is a second author, Ian C. Esselmont, who's written the novels of the Malazan Empire, the Path to Ascendancy series, which is ongoing, and I'd be curious if, for example, if you have read Malazan, have you read Ian C. Esselmont? Because I think for a lot of people, just having that second name, even though the world is completely shared and co-authored, having that second writer and not being familiar with that second writer might be enough to give some people a question mark. Anyway, I'll leave you there, because my daughter's on a short fuse, if nothing else. As I was talking, what sequel series were coming up in your mind? Either sequels that are worthy of continuation, or the opposite, sequels that you wish you hadn't read because they did retroactively put a bad taste in your mouth in some way or another. Wonderful to talk to you. I will see you on the next video. Goodbye.